Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Andia. Today, we are talking about one of my favorite subjects, the mitochondria. And you've probably heard me talk about mitochondria in past episodes, or I alluded to it, or where it's really the foundation. Our mitochondria it's the foundation of our health through, the repair of our circadian rhythms. So what we're doing when we're healing our circadian rhythm, which is a lot of what we've talked about in the past when I've done some of these lessons, we are repairing the circadian rhythm, and our mitochondria is directly impacted by this. They are our little they're environmental sensors in our body. They're sensing the environment around us. And it is very important, I believe, that we at least know, kind of have a broad understanding of what I'm talking about when I say mitochondria. And people who are just in love with this topic are referred to as mitochondriacs, like myself. And there is a great book by Randy Lee called The Mitochondriac Manifesto. And that is a really great book. He writes it so beautifully. Anyone could understand this book. So I want you to just put your science hat on a little bit. I am going to explain this in a way that it was easy for me to learn in this way with a certain analogy, and want to give credit where credit is due. And one of the teachers I learned a lot about the specifics of what I'm going to explain today is through Carrie Bennett. She was one of my teachers. So I'm going to use her analogy when I talk about the electron transport chain, which is component of the mitochondria, what we're going to talk about today. Now, just to give everybody a sense of, okay, where is the mitochondria in my body? What are you exactly talking about? So obviously we're talking about the really small things. That's what quantum is. And the mitochondria operate at a subatomic level. So when, we all have a body, I'm just going to break down the organization, which is kind of something, we all learn in like seventh, eighth grade science class or anatomy. We all have a body, and inside of our body, we have the organ system, right? And our organ system is made out of organs, and our organs are made out of tissues, and tissues are made out of cells, and cells have inside them what is called organelles, which I think is the cutest dang name for little tiny organs, the organelles. And the mitochondria is one of those organelles that are inside every single cell. There's a lot of mitochondria in every single one of our cells. And so therefore there's trillions all over our body. So the mitochondria, we also learn in school that the main function of mitochondria is to make ATP. And ATP is adenosine triphosphate. I believe I said that right. And the thing we learn is that, like, that's all the energy. That's where all the energy in your body comes from. And I actually remember learning that and questioning, really, is that every single, like, my body being able to move and do all these things at the same time and talk, and my body is also functioning all at the same time, like, and that's the only energy, that's the only source. Now we know that that isn't true. And the researcher that also questioned whether that all of our energy was coming from just the mitochondria was a researcher named Gilbert Ling. So he did the math, and he was like, yeah, no, this isn't right. This, mathematically speaking, we can't get all of the energy to function as an electric being just through ATP alone. So we now know that our water in our body is a battery, and that's a topic for a different day. But all I want to say is that we know the mitochondria does a lot more than that. In fact, it creates its own water. They emit light. So there's all sorts of functions. And inside the mitochondria, there's a little tiny chain called, well, there's a bunch of different little chains, and they're called the electron transport chain. So when we talk about collecting electrons, and through all sorts of ways we can collect electrons, through eating, we collect electrons, through grounding, through getting natural sun. There's all these ways, and we'll break them down in another episode. But when we our modern world environment right now, think of electrons or your energy in your body like money. So with our modern world, we are spending our money a lot. So like right now, I am presenting in front of a computer and I'm inside the house and I have to have the window closed and my blue blockers are on. So this is only for about 20 minutes and then I'm able to open the window back up and, be under appropriate light. But all that to say is our modern world really dehydrates these little guys, these mitochondria, and that special water that they create. Our environment is dehydrating us. We are pretty much, you can safely say most of us are dehydrated. And when we collect electrons from nature, that is replenishing the energy. That's like going out and earning some energy back or earning money, if you will, if you want to think about that money analogy. So I will leave that at that. And so these little mitochondria, they're actually, they're very old. They're 1.45 billion years old. And the researcher that really pioneered looking at mitochondria and studying it, his name is Doug Wallace, Dr. Doug Wallace, if you want to look that up. And, mitochondria, they make their own DNA. Like I said before, there are environmental sensors, and they're just really the reason why circadian signals are so important. And they move electrons through the electron transport chain. And I want to explain that electron transport chain to you today in a way that is going to be helpful for you to understand. And, the way we keep our mitochondria healthy is by collecting electrons. It is by getting sunlight. It is by eating seasonal food that's local to our environment. These are, connecting with the earth, connecting with the Schumann resonance. This is how we collect the electrons back into our body. We get electrons from hugging our pets, from hugging people, from connection. There are lots of ways we get electrons. Also from like swimming in a body of water, you're going to collect electrons. So there's all sorts of different ways that we collect electrons, but really when it comes to energy and our body being voltage and we having, these amazing little mitochondria working for us, the electron transport chain is really important. And it's not too complicated to understand, but I just wanted to point out the name of this little transport chain is called the electron transport chain. And when we think about like how we get our energy, a lot of times our mind goes to food. Well, we all love to eat, so it makes sense why we are like, this is how we gain our energy. But that is not the only way we get our energy. We also get our energy from grounding and from being in sunlight. And so, notice that the electron transport chain is not called the food transport chain. It's not called the carbohydrate transport chain. It's not called the fat transport chain. It's called the electron transport chain. So we want to think about, the energy we collect in that capacity, in that form of electrons. Well, we want to have a negative charge in our body. And it's very important for these little mitochondria to function properly. When the mitochondria are not functioning properly, this electron transport chain that I'm talking about has 4 little respiratory proteins on this little path, if you will. Now, imagine that, because for people listening, or if you're watching YouTube, I'm not sharing any pictures here. I'm just explaining because I know most people listen to the podcast. So just imagine, I want you to think of the little proteins I'm going to talk about as boulders or a rock. And this is the analogy that my teacher taught me that I'm going to teach you here now. And they're sitting on a stream. So if I gave you 4 boulders or rocks and I asked you to cross a stream that was, I don't know, 15 feet or 12 feet wide, you would really easily be able to do that by taking one of the rocks, throwing it, hopping on it, throwing another one, hopping on it, and so forth. And you'd get across just fine, very easily, and it would flow nicely. You'd have no problem. Now, if I were to ask you to cross a stream that was 100 feet wide with 4 rocks, I only gave you those same 4 rocks, you would not be able to cross it. You would eventually fall off into the river or the stream. So that's what's happening when we have inflammation in the body. So those 4 little proteins that are sitting on this chain, if they get too far apart from each other, it causes problems in the body. It's what we call inflammation or chaos or disruption. All these things mean the same thing. It is called the swelling of that electron transport chain. When we have swelling in the electron transport chain, we have inflammation. This is the baseline problem for any chronic disease is inflammation. So one of the things that came out of Doug Wallace's research that's so crazy, and I just want to take a moment to be so grateful for the mitochondria, because I remember when I was thinking about my active use, I used for methamphetamines for 12 years, right? And when you think about how long you use substances, I want you to think about that for a minute. Okay, so Andia, you just said inflammation, like I have other underlying health issues, maybe you have mental health issues, maybe you have other underlying health issues of all varieties. Maybe you're a cancer survivor, maybe you also have type 2 diabetes. Whatever your case may be, just think about how hard our mitochondria are working. So in Doug Wallace's research, he found that the threshold for disease to manifest was actually 80%. That means 80% of our mitochondria can be damaged before disease manifests. The threshold being like 70. So in that 70% to 80%, like disease can start to manifest. That's a lot of mitochondria that can be damaged before we even notice anything is wrong. So think about that for a second. Just take a moment of gratitude for the fact that our mitochondria is still working for us. We're not dead. We're like, have you ever, I mean, I've thought about this, like how did my body go through all of that and still be alive? Our bodies are so magnificent. And there's such a thing to be just so grateful for, because we do a lot of damage with our chemical use or our alcohol use or whatever your, drug of no choice was. And that damage, also our mental health and all sorts of all sorts of things. And and then think about like relationships and our environment being full of non-native EMFs and our technology and environment dehydrating us, causing that inflammation. Plus we have our disease on top of it. So not only our modern world, but then all the damage we did with our addiction. So all this combined, and our mitochondria are still freaking fighting for us. And when we go into recovery, we are starting to repair those mitochondria because we are no longer putting a substance in our body, right? So right there, you are doing a huge service for your circadian rhythm and your mitochondrial health just by stopping use. So that's amazing. We can do even more and feel even better and thrive even more in our recovery if we can get outside and see the light. Now, I've went over different ways and tactics and coping skills that you can utilize to get more light. And I'm not ever going to shut up about light, and I'm never going to shut up about the sun, and I'm never going to shut up about it being such a healing, often missing factor in our health. I'm never going to stop talking about it. Now, one of the other places I'm really talking a lot about this with actual professionals in this field. So some of you may know I created another podcast called Quantum Healthy. So just before I go into that, actually, that is the lesson on mitochondria today. And I hope that you have an understanding now of what you're healing. What I want to create for you all, which will be a future episode, is a visualization where you can tap into the healing of your mitochondria so you can really imagine. And now that you know about how these little bean-shaped structures are in your body and where they're at, how they are everywhere, and how we want them to be visually. We want them to be functioning efficiently, where that little electron transport chain has those little tiny respiratory proteins, which we were calling rocks in our analogy, or boulders. I want you to think of those just beautifully evenly spread apart and glowing, because they are a part of our inner light show that's happening inside of our body. And I want to create a visualization for you to really tap in to seeing that happening in your body when you are in a meditation. So I'm going to create one of those for you. And I hope you enjoy it and you're able to tap into just how grateful we are for our bodies and the fact that we're still moving and grooving. And the more our mitochondria heals, the better energy we have, the better we function optimally, the better our circadian rhythms are functioned and we are going to talk a lot about that on the Quantum Healthy podcast. So the Quantum Healthy podcast, I am with my co-host Laura Kissman, are bringing in professionals from the field of quantum biology. So we are going to cover a lot of topics. So I would really love if you also take a listen on over there at Quantum Healthy. And this podcast is going to remain as short lessons for me to teach you about quantum healing and also people's recovery stories. So last week we heard from Jessica Kenny, and there'll be other people on sharing their recovery stories and how they're recovering using quantum practices, which I am calling quantum recovery. So I'm very excited to keep those stories over here on this podcast for you to listen to and be inspired by, and then sharing with you and introducing you to some of my esteemed colleagues who I just love so, so dearly, and I've learned so, so much from, that I'm getting tearful for some reason. I am so excited to introduce you to these people because I am not the expert at everything. I am putting all of this information through the lens of quantum biology for you in recovery from addiction. But there are so many of you that have kiddos. There's so many of you out there that have other underlying health issues that I want to make sure that we cover with the experts. So Laura and I will be interviewing those people for you. And I'm very excited to have both of these platforms, Quantum Recovery and Quantum Healthy, for this community. Both podcasts have everything to do with addiction recovery, because every single person, it is argued anyway, that every single person is either touched by addiction or has some kind of addiction. And we're going to be able to ask these professionals in the quantum biology space questions coming through, like how have they seen this information help people with addiction? So whatever the topic may be. And Laura is just such a great partner in this because she is a nutritionist, a quantum nutritionist, and she is also a classically trained homeopath. And this is just a beautiful balance between both of us. So we can both ask these professionals these questions so you can take your health into your own hands. And we are so, so excited. The last thing I want to share with you all is that I have created a course for you with a lot of the foundational elements that you would need to know in order to actually participate in my future courses. So I'm going to be covering all the things, but this foundation course called the Quantum Recovery Reset is foundational and has so much, it's chock full of so much information. You get access to me every single month. You can ask me Q&As live, and those are also recorded, so you have access to them always. And this is really near and dear to my heart to get out there to people who are either still suffering in early recovery or long-term recovery. It's for everybody. So if you know someone who you think this would be helpful information for, oh my gosh, do be of service and share it with them. I believe that is all, and you can find the information in the link below. And if you're here on YouTube, click the little subscribe button. And in the show notes, if you click more, there will be a drop down where you will find links to many things I've shared about in this episode and also in past episodes, and then also how to contact me. So with that, I will sign off. Drink water. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found value in this information. And if you did, please share it. Another way to support the podcast is to leave a 5-star review. If you want to connect, you can message me on Instagram or email me at andiaray@outlook.com. And remember, drink water.